Well, our first one is from Mike, and he has an issue. Uh, Pretty much all literature about Christ was written by Roman scholars and others of a Roman nature, with the exception of later writers that may have taken literature from the Roman authors writing about Christ. If Rome, aka up until now the Vatican, might be the false prophet, then what other source of material is out there that shows there was a Messiah? I need something to grab onto that shows me Jesus really existed.
Well, I guess well, sort of understand the thrust of the question. I think that you're being too affected by this notion that Rome is the false prophet. That sort of thing. That's coloring your perception of history. Romans, could very well and did thousands and thousands of times record things about people that they didn't like or agree with. So I don't know that there's any reason not to like a Roman historian because we get lots of information from them. So I don't buy into the sort of the conspiratorial tack of the question. I think it's probably coming from stuff like Hyslop's Two Babylons or whatever, or maybe some, I don't know, kind of off the wall approach to biblical prophecy. But anyway, if we just go with the sources, there are a number of good books that you can get, secondary literature that will take you into the primary literature of the period, and not just Roman stuff if that matters. I'll just recommend a few things and just talk about them here. Bart Ehrman has a good book, Did Jesus Exist? The Historical Argument for Jesus of Nazareth. And I think that's a good book because Bart is basically an atheist, but he's not going to say something stupid like Jesus didn't exist because he knows better. So it's actually a really good book. It actually got Bart into some hot water with his own constituency, because he has people in that constituency that are going to be Jesus mythers. They want to argue that Jesus never existed, and Bart certainly is no friend to evangelical Christianity. But Bart's book basically said this idea that Jesus never existed is nonsense. So I think it's a book you could really benefit from. Schaeffer's book, that's Schafer, Peter Schaeffer, Jesus in the Talmud. This certainly isn't Roman. Again, I'm not saying that matters. But for the sake of the question, the references to Jesus in the Talmud are interesting because on the one hand, they don't say very nice things about Jesus. They say really insulting things about Jesus. They refer to him as a sorcerer and whatnot, conjurer, occultist, again, because of the miraculous stuff that Jesus does. And that's interesting in and of itself because here you have an audience, a writer, writers, when it comes to Jewish material in the rabbinic period, living century or so, after Jesus or in late antiquity, just generally. And it would have been really easy for them to say, what's all this Jesus talk? The guy never existed. So, who cares? Don't pay any attention to this. This is nonsense. But they don't do that, again, because they're not idiots. What they do is they say, we don't want you following Jesus because he's all these bad things, to the Jewish community. And when they reference him as a sorcerer or whatnot, again, it tells you that they took these stories about what Jesus did pretty seriously because they have to attribute them to a source. And a bad one, of course, because they don't want people following Jesus. So Jesus in the Talmud, I think, is worth having. Pitre's book, Pitre, The Case for Jesus, the Biblical and Historical Evidence for Christ, is a good one. Pitre, we've mentioned his work before here on the podcast. He's a New Testament scholar and a good one. He's a Catholic, so I don't agree with his theological, predilections on certain things. But he's a really good scholar. Has done really important work in the Gospels. So he has a very readable, short book on, again, the evidence for Jesus. Greg Boyd and Paul Eddy have a book that's a little older than some of these other ones, The Jesus Legend, A Case for the Historical Reliability of the Synoptic Jesus Tradition. I think that's an important book because both of them interact with Jesus myther stuff pretty extensively. Again, the idea that Jesus didn't exist or the zeitgeist nonsense, they interact with that a good bit on a scholarly academic level. And in the same vein, Maurice Casey, who again is, I don't know where he might be an atheist too, or an agnostic or something. He's certainly not a evangelical Christian. Casey's book, Jesus, Evidence and Argument, or Mythicist Myths. Okay, he again is kind of like a Bart Ehrman guy, but he doesn't. I think he's a little more blunt than Bart. He has some really unfavorable things to say about sources out there on the internet. He's actually spent a good deal of time, doing research on internet writers like Akaria S. and the people who peddle this Jesus mythicist idea. And Casey is a New Testament scholar of high repute, an Aramaic specialist to be even more specific. But his book is very useful again for making the point that the idea that Jesus didn't exist is pretty much nonsense. There are good reasons, good sources, good reasons, to think that basically what the world has thought up until, quite recently, maybe in the 19th century, and you get a few people, that sort of, go out on a limb and try to make these really odd, sort of arguments and frankly abuse primary sources to do that task. But these are all good scholars that are going to respond to that kind of thing. If you wanted something more fun, you could go to my website, drmsh.com, and go up to the resources tab, where I have the link for recommended reading. If you land on that page, click on the part of the sources about Jesus myth or Jesus mythicists, that sort of thing, those sort of resources. I have links there to some interaction with the Bayes theorem argument. Again, it's an argument from math, basically, statistics about Jesus' existence or non-existence, and it's something that gets discussed on the internet. We applied the Bayes theorem to Jesus, and we found out that statistical likelihood that he didn't exist. Well, what's fun about some of the references I have here is there are people who apply Bayes theorem to the people who write the other posts, asking if the authors who wrote the other internet stuff actually exist according to the Bayes theorem. In other words, they turn the whole thing on its head. It's actually quite funny. But again, just showing how the Bayes theorem approach really isn't that helpful, because you have to presume certain things along the way and plug certain assumptions. Basically come up with numbers to plug into the equation at certain points, and you can more or less manipulate it to discover, lo and behold, that the person who wrote this post over here on the internet about Jesus not existing, he doesn't exist either, according to the Bayes theorem. So again, it's kind of fun. But I would say, your academic sources there, I just gave you a short list. They don't have a particular bias. Boyd and Eddy are the only evangelicals in the bunch. Everybody else is something else: Jewish, agnostic, atheist, and they're all saying the same thing. Jesus certainly existed.